Corsair's K65 Plus Wireless is a corporate take on a custom 75% keyboard. It makes all the right noises and looks the part, but there's just something a little off. Now don't get me wrong, this is a great board, and by the end of this video you'll understand why I still recommend it, but there are definitely some things you want to know before dropping your cash on one. The K65 Plus is actually a 75% board, comprising of a full center section, a full F keys row, and full-sized arrow keys, but a condensed sort of midsection with home, page up, and page down as dedicated keys, whereas things like print screen, end, and insert are left to secondary layer functions. One nice addition is a knob. I love a good knob. This one is nice and hard. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. But yeah, you do have a very nice, feelingly metal knurled knob at the top right, with actually enough space to use it around it too, which is pretty nice. Switches wise, you get Corsair's own cherry clone red switches. They're 45-gram linear switches that come pre-lubed, with 4mm of total travel and an actuation point at 1.9mm. Now, personally, I'm not a massive fan of linear switches, and these ones weirdly don't feel that linear. The initial force is ridiculously light, to the point that I was accidentally pressing keys when I didn't realise. But the lower end is super spongy. It's like there's a bit of really soft open cell foam under each key that you have to push past to bottom it out. It's definitely a weird feeling for sure. Certain keys, really the stabilized ones, but like enter and backspace being the main culprits here, feel like the foam is actually inside the switch the whole way, as they feel noticeably stiffer and take more effort to actuate them compared to the regular keys. Now, typing sounds-wise, well, the K65 Plus is ridiculously quiet. Just take a listen. It has an incredibly soft and muted sound to it, with only slight tapping from the caps themselves. Everything else is muted. For a more workplace style environment, assuming you don't mind the switch feel, this would be absolutely perfect. To me, it's hard to describe, but I don't know, ironically, perhaps it's a little too refined. It feels, I don't know, like artificially quiet? That doesn't really make any sense. I'm struggling to put my finger on what feels just slightly off about the whole typing experience of this board, but I mean, maybe if you end up trying one for yourself, you'll see what I mean. The good news though is that if, like me, you don't like the feel of Corsair's MLX Reds, well, these are hot swappable. Pull them out and stick whatever else you want in. Part of the feel definitely comes down to the build quality. While this is a plastic case both top and bottom, there is a steel reinforcement plate inside, and that adds a fair amount of heft and stiffness. There's next to no deck flex here, despite the plastic case. I must admit that I'm quite impressed with how well Corsair matched the plastic shell's finish to an aluminium finish. It's really kind of uncanny. That, coupled with the keycaps, I think round out my feelings, or my weird feelings about this board. The caps themselves are dual-tone PBT dye sublimation caps with a slightly textured finish. They aren't shine-through, which, considering how bright the RGB LEDs are on this thing, is kind of a curse and a blessing. And we'll come back to the RGB in a second, but I mean, the caps themselves, at least to me anyway, they have a bit of a cheap feel to them. Now, I've felt the same with a very similarly made caps, so that's probably just personal preference, sort of shining through, but it does feel just a little bit cheap to the fingers. Now, getting back to the RGB, of course you can control that in iCUE if you want, or surprisingly, you can access 10 different RGB modes just by holding FN and pressing any of the number keys. Since the caps aren't shine-through, you don't get the useful illumination of the keys, nor their tiny secondary or tertiary functions, which is something I definitely prefer to have than not, although it is hard to argue that the board doesn't have bright and visible RGB lighting. Speaking of those secondary functions, it's worth noting that the keycap design is actually a little clustered. First, you've got the Mac and Windows keys at the bottom, rather than a replaceable set that you normally get for this sort of changeable board, and of course the switch to change which of profiles you want up at the top side of the board. But then you've also got absolutely tiny printing for things like end, print screen, and insert. Hell, even the RGB mode icons are tiny and kind of almost faded already. While I do like having this laid out on the caps themselves rather than in an instruction manual sheet that you need to memorize fully, I also don't know that I'm totally happy with this design either. I'm trying to think of what I would rather have instead. Ninja printing on the secondary functions maybe, or just larger fonts for them, but I mean, maybe you can let me know what you think in the comments down below. One thing that I can't argue against though is the styling. The bottom especially is genuinely really cool, and it's a shame that it'll spend its whole life face down. The two-tone keycaps are pretty nice too. Subtle but stylish. I like it. It's worth pointing out that this is a pretty basic profile that is really pretty easy to get to grips with, and you even got two sets of height adjustable feet at the bottom. On the top side is where you find all of the controls for the wireless functions, either for use with the included 2.4 GHz dongle that has a handy storage slot up there as well, or with Bluetooth with up to 3 devices. You've also got the USB-C port for charging, although you can actually use this in fully wired mode if you would rather as well. Battery-wise, it is a 4200 mAh cell, which Corsair claims can give you 266 hours of usage. That's 11 straight days if you turn the RGB LEDs off. They don't seem to quote a more sensible usage figure, but from my admittedly limited experience with it, even with the LEDs on, it's good for a sort of average week's worth of usage. You do have a battery indicator up at the top left, right next to the RGB off micro switch, should you want to instantly swap into stealth mode. Of course, we can't talk about a gaming keyboard and not talk about the gaming experience. This is where the K65 Plus Wireless really picks up for me. The hair trigger sensitivity and non-linear actuation force were actively annoying for typing this very script out, but for gaming, it was exactly what I wanted. It felt fast and responsive, and honestly kind of like I was more rolling around a joystick than pressing keys. I did mistype a fair bit at first, but you do get used to it, and it ends up feeling more like an advantage. The hinge point here, as always, is price. The MSRP for this is £150, which, well, is actually pretty cheap for a wireless mechanical keyboard. Feels a little too high for what you actually get. Luckily, at least at the time of filming, Corsair has lowered that price to just £110, and for that price, it's a lot easier to recommend. The foundation of this board is pretty solid. The build quality is good, it's customizable, you can change out the switches and caps if you want, and personally the 75% layout makes a lot more sense for me from a practicality aspect. At £150, I would seriously be considering putting up the extra for the Keychron Q3 Max that I reviewed recently, but £110, especially if you want the wireless features, I would say it's a good shout. Of course, with that said, those are my thoughts, but I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of the K65 Plus Wireless? Is this a board for you, or is there something else in your vision instead? Let me know in the comments. If you are interested in this, I will leave a global Amazon affiliate link in the description that you can check out. And if you want to see more videos like this one, you can hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification icon. There's also plenty of other videos in the end cards you can check out if you want to keep watching. And otherwise, that's kind of it. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you all in the next video.